Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of The Path of Shadows, where we dive deep into different perspectives on Satanism, religious pluralism, and spiritual empowerment. Today, we're tackling a very nuanced topic: the differences and intersections between the Satanic Temple, known as TST, and traditional/theistic Satanism. This episode will explore the key philosophies and practices that define these two approaches to Satanism and how each offers a distinct path to personal empowerment. So, buckle up, because we're about to delve into a world where secularism, supernaturalism, rebellion, and spiritual autonomy intersect. Let's start by breaking down the most obvious point of divergence between these two movements: belief in the supernatural. Non-supernaturalist religion versus supernatural belief. The Satanic Temple is what we call a non-supernaturalist religion. Unlike most traditional religions, TST does not require its members to believe in supernatural deities, afterlife, or magic. Instead, their primary focus is on shared values, ethics, and social activism. They use the figure of Satan symbolically, more of a metaphor for rebellion, questioning authority, and pursuing knowledge. This kind of secular framework positions TST as a religion that challenges traditional concepts of divinity. However, when we compare this to theistic Satanism, we see a stark contrast. Theistic Satanists generally believe in Satan as an actual deity or spiritual being. They worship Satan and engage in rituals with the belief that they are connecting with this divine figure. For them, Satan is not just a symbol, but a force or entity that represents personal transformation, power, and enlightenment. This approach is deeply spiritual and involves a relationship with the supernatural, whether that's Satan or other demonic beings. The difference here is profound. TST is centered on a secular, symbolic approach to Satan, while theistic Satanism embraces a more traditional, religious belief system. Religious pluralism, coexistence of belief systems. A fascinating similarity between the two movements is their shared belief in religious pluralism. Both movements advocate for religious freedom and the coexistence of various belief systems. However, TST is more public and vocal about using the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution to push for religious pluralism, ensuring that Satanism is given equal footing alongside Christianity or other mainstream religions. They believe in dismantling the notion that the U.S. is exclusively a Christian nation. By participating in public events and legal battles, TST asserts their place in a pluralistic society, pushing for equality and the protection of minority religious expressions. On the other hand, while theistic Satanism also benefits from religious pluralism, its focus is often more private and individualized. Theistic Satanists typically aren't seeking public acceptance in the same way TST does. Their rituals and worship are more personal and intimate, focusing on their connection with Satan rather than engaging in public political activism. Culture jamming, TST's subversive tool. Next, let's talk about one of TST's most effective strategies: culture jamming. Culture jamming is when you take the symbols, language, or tactics of the dominant culture and subvert them. TST is a master at this. From provocative demonstrations like "The future of baby is now" to installing a Baphomet statue alongside Ten Commandments monuments, TST uses culture jamming to expose the inconsistencies and hypocrisies in dominant power structures. For example, Jex Blackmore, one of TST's most well-known former spokespersons, spearheaded events that highlighted how symbols of Christianity often hold a monopolistic grip over public spaces. By pushing satanic imagery into those same spaces, TST turns those symbols on their head, encouraging people to think critically about what's accepted in society and why. In contrast, theistic Satanism typically doesn't engage in this type of public spectacle. Instead, their focus remains within the spiritual and ritualistic realms. While culture jamming may not be central to theistic Satanism, there's still an inherent rebellion in the practice of worshipping a being that mainstream religions deem evil. The discourse of evil, reclaiming satanic identity. This brings us to the next point: appropriating the discourse of evil. Historically, being labeled a Satanist was a slander, especially for anyone who questioned Christian values. TST has flipped this narrative, fully embracing the label of Satanist but redefining what it means. To TST, being a Satanist isn't about doing harm or chaos. Instead, it's about standing for justice, individualism, and questioning tyrannical authority. Through acts of charity and social work, TST defies expectations. For instance, people expect Satanists to be malicious, yet TST runs charity drives, protests for equality, and challenges systemic injustice, making people question, who's really the evil one here? On the other hand, Theistic Satanism also deals with the label of evil, but rather than subverting it, they often embrace it. In Theistic Satanism, evil is viewed as relative. What's considered evil by one religion may be seen as personal empowerment or spiritual truth in another. Theistic Satanists often take pride in rejecting the constraints of Christian morality, finding freedom in the very label that others fear. Counter-myths, the story of a secular nation. A crucial tool in TST's strategy is the concept of counter-myth. In the realm of religious studies, myths are stories that shape cultural understanding, and the dominant myth in America is that it's a Christian nation. TST challenges this with a counter-myth, arguing that the Founding Fathers intended the U.S. to be a secular country where religion and government are separate. This counter-myth is part of TST's broader fight for secularism and religious equality. They highlight how their values, justice, autonomy, and reason align more closely with the founders' ideals than modern religious zealotry. Theistic Satanism, by contrast, doesn't focus on political narratives or historical myths in the same way. While they may challenge dominant religious structures, their myths revolve around spiritual growth, personal power, and the belief in Satan as a liberating deity. Their focus is on inner transformation and the mythological significance of Satan as a figure of rebellion and enlightenment. Therapeutic blasphemy, reclaiming personal power. Finally, we have therapeutic blasphemy, a concept deeply embedded in both TST and Theistic Satanism. For TST, this often involves defacing or destroying symbols of oppressive religions. Take the Bible-tearing ceremony at SatanCon 2023, where Shalice Bly symbolically tore apart a Bible as an act of personal liberation. This act wasn't meant to hurt anyone but was a way for attendees to confront the religious trauma many had experienced and reclaim their autonomy. In Theistic Satanism, therapeutic blasphemy often takes the form of more elaborate rituals, such as black masses. These rituals help participants overcome the psychological power that religious symbols hold over them, allowing them to reclaim control over their own lives. Both movements use blasphemy as a way of challenging the status quo and empowering individuals, but while TST's acts of blasphemy are often more performative and political, Theistic Satanisms are deeply personal and spiritual. Conclusion: 2 paths to empowerment. To wrap things up, the Satanic Temple and Theistic Satanism offer 2 very different approaches to Satanism. TST focuses on secularism, activism, and social justice, while Theistic Satanism embraces the worship of Satan as a spiritual being, with an emphasis on personal transformation. Both challenge conventional religious structures, but they do so in vastly different ways. The Satanic Temple reclaims the narrative of Satanism through public acts of defiance and legal battles, while Theistic Satanists focus on spiritual growth through worship and rituals. Despite their differences, both movements empower their members to reclaim their own autonomy and push against the boundaries of societal norms.